I took a deep breath as I stepped out of the cab, my heels clicking softly against the rooftop's polished stone path. The city shimmered below, golden lights flickering like stars that had fallen just close enough to touch. The rooftop restaurant, with its soft music and warm lanterns strung across the open terrace, was as beautiful as I remembered. Maybe more so tonight because I needed it to be. I needed tonight to mean something. I had spent weeks planning this dinner. Not because I was desperate, but because I believed in trying. After everything Jonathan and I had been through, months of barely their conversations, the cold edge in his voice, the late nights he never explained, I still held on to the hope that somewhere beneath the silence was the man I married. And if there was any night to bring him back, it was this one, our anniversary. 12 years. A number I used to say proudly. Tonight, I wore the dress he once told me made me look like I stepped out of a dream. I remembered the way he used to look at me when I wore it. I didn't know if that look still existed, but I was going to try to find it. Our table was already reserved, corner seat, best view of the skyline, the kind of place where memories could be remade. I asked the hostess to bring out the wine once we were seated. Jonathan's favorite, a bold red from Napa, smooth but powerful, like the man he once was. The engraved watch sat in its velvet box in my purse. I had it made with a simple inscription, "To new chapters, together." When Jonathan arrived, he looked surprised. Not startled, but the kind of surprise that comes when someone realizes they've forgotten to be prepared. His eyes scanned the setup, the rose petals across the tablecloth, the soft flicker of candlelight, and I saw a flicker of something I couldn't name. Guilt, maybe. Or regret. I hoped it was the beginning of a thaw. He sat down across from me, smoothing out the sleeves of his dark blazer. "You look amazing," he said, almost uncertainly, like he didn't know if he was allowed to say it. I smiled, keeping it gentle, trying not to show how much I wanted him to say more. I watched him pick up the wine glass as the sommelier poured, and for a moment it almost felt normal. Like we were just a couple on a date, not two strangers pretending we didn't see the cracks spidering through everything we built. "I thought tonight could be special," I said, lifting my glass. "A fresh start." I leaned in slightly, hoping he'd meet me there. But he didn't. His eyes dropped to the table, then drifted over the city skyline like he was somewhere far away. He nodded slowly. "It's beautiful," he murmured. But his voice held no warmth. Dinner began with soft conversation. I asked about work and he gave brief, distant answers. I mentioned the kids and he smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. Still, I tried. I told him about the funny story Ava told at breakfast, how Ethan got an A on his math test. I laughed at my own nervous jokes, filled the silence with stories he used to love hearing. He listened, or at least he looked like he did. But there was a tension in his posture, a stiffness I couldn't ignore. I could feel the moment building, the way a quiet storm coils in the air before it breaks. I reached into my bag and pulled out the box, sliding it across the table. "I got you something," I said. "I know we haven't had many reasons to celebrate lately, but I wanted you to have this. It's a reminder of us." He opened it, stared down at the watch for a long moment, then closed the lid slowly. "It's beautiful," he said, but again, his voice was flat, distant. My heart started to sink. Something in his expression was changing, hardening, like he had made a decision and now had to carry it out. "Izzy," he said after a pause, using the nickname only people from our early days knew. That alone twisted something inside me. "There's something I need to tell you." I held my breath, hoping it would be an admission of guilt followed by a confession of love. Maybe something like, "I've been lost, but I want to find my way back to you." Instead, his face fell into an expression I couldn't read, and his next words cut through the night like a blade. But that moment, that truth, comes next. Right then, I still held on to the belief that love was enough. That the pain could be patched. That this dinner would mean something. That maybe tonight I could bring him back. I didn't know I was standing at the edge of the life I thought we had, about to be shoved off. All I knew was that I tried. I showed up, and I loved him enough to believe in us one last time. I barely tasted the food. The steak, perfectly seared, sat untouched on my plate, its juices mingling with the rosemary glaze like some artistic attempt to distract from what was unraveling before me. My hands, steady just moments ago, suddenly felt foreign, like they no longer belonged to someone who could command her own story. Jonathan sat across from me, his fork resting in midair, his eyes not on me, but just past my shoulder, as if looking at me directly would make his words heavier than they already were. He hadn't even flinched when he said it. "I've been cheating on you for 2 years," he stated, voice clear, expression unreadable. "And I'm leaving." No trembling voice. No hesitation. Not even a hint of shame. The words landed like frost against my skin. I thought I'd react, cry, shout, stand up, and knock the wineglass over in some dramatic show of heartbreak. But none of that happened. Instead, a strange calm blanketed me. I felt my heart press against my ribs, not out of pain but out of clarity. Because even if I hadn't known the exact moment would come tonight, I'd sensed it was always waiting in the shadows, circling closer. I straightened in my seat and met his gaze. He blinked, maybe expecting chaos. Maybe expecting me to make it easier for him by being hysterical, to validate his decision with the mess of my reaction. But I wasn't going to give him that satisfaction. Not now. Not after all he had stolen from me piece by piece while smiling like everything was normal. I took a slow sip of wine. The red was rich, bitter with a cherry aftertaste. I let it linger on my tongue a moment before setting the glass back down. "To 2 years, then," I said coolly, raising my glass in a steady hand. "And to your new life." He looked confused for a split second, as if he hadn't fully processed what I'd said. I watched him try to decipher my calm, like he was flipping through a mental script and realizing I wasn't following his cues. He had come here prepared to be the one with control, to confess, to wound, and then to walk away with the pride of being honest. He didn't expect me to smile. And I did. "Really?" I asked, still smiling. 2 years, Jonathan? That's commitment. Should I be flattered it took you this long to say something? "Izzy, I didn't," he started, but I cut him off with a small shake of my head. "No, don't. Not tonight." I took another sip of wine and leaned forward slightly. "I planned this evening because I thought we could start again. I picked this place because it's where we celebrated your promotion, remember that? You kissed me like I was your whole world. I wore this dress because I thought it might remind you of something good. I chose your favorite wine. And I got you a watch engraved with hope. Turns out it's a parting gift." Jonathan ran a hand through his hair, visibly thrown off. "You don't understand." "I understand perfectly," I interrupted, voice still even. "You've been living 2 lives and finally got tired of pretending. And instead of owning up to it when it mattered, you waited until you were ready to start over somewhere else. You waited until you had someone else waiting in the wings." His silence told me everything. I didn't need names. I didn't need an apology. What I needed was already forming quietly in the back of my mind, an escape plan that had begun long before he realized this relationship was crumbling. And now that the truth was out, I was freer than he could possibly imagine. "I didn't want to hurt you," he said softly, as if those 6 words could make up for the years of betrayal. "No," I replied, setting my glass down for the last time. "You just didn't want to be the bad guy." But newsflash, Jonathan, cheating on your wife for 2 years, lying to her face every single day, and then announcing your departure over filet mignon doesn't exactly scream noble. He had the decency to look away then. I stood slowly, smoothing my dress and reaching for my clutch. Inside it, my phone buzzed softly right on time. I already knew who it was. Not him. Not her. My people. The ones who would make sure this entire unraveling became the first step towards something better. Something real. "Where are you going?" he asked, almost like he was surprised I wasn't going to cry. "I'm going to enjoy the rest of my evening," I said. "You should take a moment and think about what you're walking away from. I gave you everything. And tonight, I'll toast to the fact that I finally stopped giving it to someone who didn't deserve it." I turned before he could respond, walking slowly but deliberately toward the edge of the terrace. The view hadn't changed. The lights still sparkled. The air still felt crisp with possibility. I paused, closed my eyes, and let the wind brush against my cheek like a whisper of strength. He thought this was the end. But I knew better. It was the beginning. I leaned against the terrace railing, feeling the cool metal press into my skin as the wind picked up, tousling a few strands of my hair. Behind me, Jonathan had stepped away to take a call, or maybe to collect himself. I didn't care. My fingers moved smoothly as I unlocked my phone and opened the encrypted message thread. 2 names were pinned at the top, Rachel and Noah. My lawyer. My private investigator. My safety net. My sword and shield. I typed just 4 words. It's happening. Move forward. A part of me exhaled. Not in relief, but in resolve. For months, I had waited for Jonathan to finally say it aloud. That he was unfaithful. That he was done. I had stopped needing apologies long ago. What I needed was that confession, clean and undeniable, and now that I had it, the gears I'd set in motion could finally roar to life. When I'd first suspected the lies, I was still in the phase of wanting to be wrong. He was distant, yes, but life was stressful, and I convinced myself that distance wasn't a crime. Then the receipts started appearing, literally. A hotel charge from an afternoon when he claimed to be at work. 2 movie tickets when he said he had a solo night. A perfume scent on his jacket that didn't belong to me. I wanted to confront him, but something in my gut whispered, don't. Not yet. That was when I called Rachel. She and I had gone to college together, and I knew she was the kind of attorney who turned courtrooms into battlefields. She told me one thing right away. Don't accuse. Don't yell. Don't tip him off. Document. Build. Wait. And so I did. Noah came into the picture 2 weeks later. A quiet, meticulous man with eyes that missed nothing. He followed Jonathan with precision, collected photos, tracked locations, pulled phone records. I hated every update he sent me, every blurry photo of Jonathan holding hands with someone who wasn't me. But with every piece, I built my fortress, 1 brick of truth at a time. By the time tonight arrived, I knew everything. Her name was Delilah, a graphic designer. 31. Brown hair, pale skin, long laugh. She thought she was in love with him. Thought she had the better version of him. Thought I was the villain he described behind closed doors. She didn't know he was lying to both of us. Until tonight. My phone buzzed again. Rachel's reply was immediate and precise. On it. Noah has the package ready. Delilah will be there in 10. I slid the phone back into my purse and returned to the table. Jonathan wasn't back yet. His wine was untouched, his chair slightly askew, like he'd fled mid-thought. I sat down, my back straight, the city behind me glowing like a silent witness. I could already feel the shift in the air, like the moment before a thunderstorm when the world holds its breath. He returned moments later, eyes scanning my face like he expected to find devastation. Instead, he found serenity. I poured myself more wine and gestured for him to sit. Everything okay? I asked, my voice laced with a faint edge. He hesitated. Yeah, just needed a minute. I nodded like I believed him. Let him think I still played by his rules. Let him believe he still held the strings. We fell into a strange quiet, the tension almost rhythmic now. He shifted in his seat, fingers tapping against his glass, not drinking. He looked like he wanted to say more, maybe explain, maybe beg, maybe rationalize the mess he'd created, but I didn't give him the chance. Because I saw her. Delilah. She stepped onto the terrace, guided by the hostess, her eyes searching the space until they landed on us. She wore a soft lavender dress and a nervous smile. I watched Jonathan stiffen. His head whipped toward me, panic crawling across his face. What the hell, he started, standing halfway, but I raised a hand calmly. Sit, I said. And he did. Delilah approached slowly, her brows furrowed. Jonathan, she asked, her voice rising with each step. Why are you here? You said you were. With my cold, bitter wife? I finished for her, standing to greet her. Hi, I'm Isabel, Jonathan's wife. For the past 12 years. She blinked, stunned. Wait, what? Jonathan stood fully now, his words a rushed, incoherent jumble. Delilah, I can explain, I didn't know she'd. Oh, he didn't tell you? I said, stepping between them with a smile that felt more like armor. I thought you deserved to meet me. Woman to woman. Delilah's mouth opened and closed like she couldn't find the ground. She turned to Jonathan. You said you were separated. And he said you knew, I added, pulling out the small folder Noah had prepared. But let's not take his word for it. Here. Photos. Receipts. Screenshots. Timelines. Audio clips. Take your pick. Delilah looked down at the folder I held out, then back at Jonathan, whose face had gone ashen. You've been lying to me? She whispered. I didn't, Delilah, I was going to leave her. You told me she was cruel, she said, shaking her head. You made me feel sorry for you. I know, I said gently. He's good at that. And just like that, the illusion shattered. Delilah looked at me with tears of humiliation in her eyes, and I felt no satisfaction, only quiet confirmation. She turned and walked away without another word. Jonathan called after her, but it was useless. He turned to me, face red, fists clenched. You planned this? I tilted my head. No, Jonathan. I prepared for this. There's a difference. I picked up my purse, pushed in my chair, and looked at the man who had once vowed to protect my heart. This is just the beginning, I said, voice low and steady. You lit the match. I'm just watching the fire catch. Then I walked away, leaving him to smolder in the wreckage. I returned to the table with a calmness that surprised even me. My fingers smoothed the linen napkin across my lap as if we weren't seconds away from detonation. Jonathan was already unraveling. I could see it in the way he shifted in his seat, like the floor beneath him had gone soft. He kept glancing toward the restaurant entrance, still hoping, maybe, that what just happened with Delilah had been a bad dream. Or that I'd back down and let him craft his exit on his terms. But this wasn't his story anymore. Not tonight. I sipped my wine and watched him fidget, his lips twitching with half-formed justifications that never made it past his teeth. It was almost impressive how quickly his mask had cracked once someone else entered the scene. But I didn't want to hear his excuses. Not now. Not ever. What I wanted was control. Not revenge, not cruelty, just the cold clarity of truth, displayed in the most undeniable way possible. Delilah hadn't left. She had stormed out, yes, but Noah was already waiting downstairs, just in case. He would have intercepted her, spoken gently, showed her the rest of the evidence if needed. I had instructed him carefully. I wasn't here to shame her, I was here to end the illusion. For all of us. So when Delilah stepped back onto the terrace, her face pale and her mouth pressed into a tight line, I wasn't surprised. Jonathan, on the other hand, froze mid-breath. He looked like a man staring at his own funeral. I'm not done, she said, voice cold, direct and sharp. I want to hear it. From you. He stood too quickly, knocking his glass over in the process. Red wine bled across the white tablecloth, dark and dramatic. A fitting metaphor, I thought. He grabbed a napkin uselessly, trying to blot the stain, his hands shaking. Delilah, listen, this isn't the time. We're in public. Can we talk about this later? No, I said, rising from my seat with calm precision. There's no later, Jonathan. You said this was the night you were leaving me. You wanted clarity. So here it is. I gestured for her to sit, and she hesitated. I could tell she didn't know whether to trust me, but curiosity, and probably heartbreak, won out. She lowered herself into the chair across from me, her eyes never leaving him. He told me you were cold, she began, her voice low, brittle with betrayal. That you didn't love him anymore. That you manipulated him into staying for the kids. I nodded slowly. And I'm guessing he told you he slept in the guest room, said we barely spoke, painted a picture of a woman who pushed him away. She nodded. He lied, I said simply. We had issues, yes. But Jonathan didn't leave because he was neglected. He left because he was weak. Because lying was easier than facing the discomfort of real honesty. Delilah looked at him again. Did you ever love me? Jonathan's mouth opened, but no sound came out. He looked trapped, exposed in a way he never imagined, his fantasy world now colliding with reality, both women sitting across from each other, no longer enemies, just casualties of his selfishness. I pulled out the last piece, the printed calendar with color-coded markings. One color for his time with me, another for the nights he spent with her. The overlap was brutal. I slid it across the table to her. "This is where he was," I said softly. "Each time he said he was stuck at work, traveling, sick, he was with one of us. Or both." Delilah stared at it, her eyes moving slowly over the neatly labeled lies. Her breath hitched. She looked younger now, unsure, broken. I recognized that look. I'd seen it in the mirror not so long ago. "I didn't know," she whispered. "I swear, I thought he was telling me the truth." I nodded. "I know. And believe it or not, I'm not angry at you. You weren't the one who broke our vows." He did. That was when she stood. Her body straightened with something like dignity, but her shoulders shook slightly. "You're disgusting," she said to Jonathan. "You used both of us." Jonathan's face contorted. "You don't understand, this was complicated." "No," she snapped. "It was simple. You lied. That's all there is to it." Without another word, she turned and walked away. For good this time. The silence left behind was thick with what couldn't be undone. Jonathan looked like a man freshly buried under the rubble of his own decisions. He opened his mouth to speak, but I raised a hand. "I don't want to hear it," I said, voice clipped. "You wanted to be free. You are." He stared at me, stunned by the ease of my dismissal. "You think you've won something tonight," he said bitterly. "No," I replied. "I didn't win. I just stopped losing." Then I turned, not in haste, not with drama, but with the same composure I'd carried all evening. I walked away from that table, my heels clicking softly against the stone once more. This time, I didn't look back. Because the woman I was now? She wasn't someone who clung to what hurt her. She was someone who let it burn and kept walking through the ashes. The restaurant had gone eerily quiet. Not silent, no. There were still murmurs at nearby tables, the subtle clinking of silverware, a waiter discreetly passing by, but the energy had shifted. People had seen. They had heard. And though I hadn't raised my voice, the impact of what happened rippled outward like a stone in water. I could feel their eyes following me as I returned to the table, calm, composed, unbothered. Jonathan, on the other hand, looked like he'd been hit by a truck. His face was flushed, his posture slumped, and his once confident demeanor hung off him like an ill-fitting coat. He glanced around nervously, aware now of the attention he was drawing. He had always cared too much about how people saw him, how carefully curated his image was. But now, under the low romantic lighting and the judgmental glances, that image was shattering. And I wasn't done yet. I sat down again, delicately adjusting my napkin, ignoring the mess of spilled wine and the smeared blotches on the linen. Jonathan stood, hesitated, then slowly lowered himself back into his chair. His hand trembled slightly as he reached for his glass. This time, he drank. "Are you satisfied?" he asked, voice tight. "Satisfaction isn't what I'm after," I said simply. "But truth? That's a start." He leaned forward, voice dropping. "You just humiliated me. You ambushed me in public and dragged Delilah into it. You think this makes you look strong?" I looked at him, really looked at him, and for the first time in a long while, I didn't see the man I had fallen in love with. I saw someone small. Someone who mistook manipulation for cleverness, secrecy for strength. I wasn't angry anymore. I was simply done pretending he had any power over me. "You're upset I did it in public?" I asked, tilting my head. "You've been lying to both of us for years in private. Tell me, Jonathan, was it really the setting that hurt your pride, or the fact that you no longer control the narrative?" He stiffened, eyes narrowing. "You think you're some kind of hero in this?" "No," I replied, my voice as steady as the wine in my hand. "I think I'm a woman who finally decided to stop being collateral damage in your story." I reached into my purse and retrieved the slim manila envelope Noah had handed me earlier that day. It held the final pieces. Everything neatly catalogued, hotel bills with Delilah's name, credit card statements, copies of texts where he'd promised her a life I was supposedly keeping him from. All things I'd held on to, not to shame him, but to defend myself. To be ready when the day came, and it had. I placed the envelope on the table between us. "What's this?" he asked, eyeing it like it might explode. "Proof," I said. "Of everything you denied. Of everything I endured while you lied to my face and slept beside me like nothing was wrong. You said you wanted to leave tonight, so here, take it. You're free. But understand this, you don't get to walk away as the victim. Not anymore." Jonathan stared at the envelope, then at me. His eyes were glassy now, the sharpness dulled. Maybe it was the shock finally settling in. Or maybe he was starting to understand that this moment, the one he thought he'd control, was never his to command. "I loved you," he said suddenly, almost like a plea. "Once?" I didn't flinch. "I know. I loved you too. But you killed it the second you decided your desires mattered more than your vows." He ran a hand down his face. "This is going to ruin me." I gave a small, humorless smile. "No, Jonathan. You ruined yourself. I just stopped hiding it for you." I could feel the eyes again, strangers pretending not to listen, yet unmistakably present. I didn't care. If anything, I wanted them to see. Not out of revenge, but because I'd spent too long living behind closed doors, swallowing pain and pretending everything was fine. Tonight, the truth was exposed under chandeliers and candlelight, and I was no longer afraid of what people would think. I wanted them to see the difference between a woman unraveling and a woman reclaiming her voice. I stood again, slowly this time. Carefully. The kind of movement made when one knows the storm has passed and all that's left is choosing which direction to walk. Jonathan looked up at me like he didn't know what to say. Maybe because, for once, he didn't. "This isn't the end," I said softly. "It's the beginning of your reckoning." "And mine?" "It's the beginning of my freedom." He opened his mouth, but I didn't wait for a reply. I picked up my clutch, smoothed my dress, and walked away from the table where my marriage had both started and ended. I didn't turn around. I didn't need to. The air outside felt lighter, like I had finally stepped out of a room filled with smoke. My phone buzzed again, Noah, confirming that everything had been sent to the right places. Rachel had already drafted what we needed. The machine was in motion. And Jonathan? He was still sitting at that table, wine-stained, alone, the threads of his deception finally pulled apart for all to see. The next morning, the sky was strangely clear. No rain, no clouds, just that quiet kind of stillness that often follows destruction. I stood by the window, coffee in hand, watching the city below stir to life. But it wasn't the hum of traffic or the joggers passing by that held my attention, it was the silence within me. I hadn't cried. Not last night, not this morning. The storm had passed, and now all that remained was the calm clarity of purpose. I was done letting Jonathan write our story. It was time I told the truth in my own voice. I scrolled through my phone as messages poured in. Rachel had already sent the full digital dossier to Jonathan's attorney with a formal statement of intent. Noah had delivered copies to the people who mattered. Mutual friends, Jonathan's employer, key figures in our carefully curated social circle. Not anonymously. Not with malice. Just facts. Truth. Laid bare. The doorbell rang. I opened it to Noah, punctual and composed as always. He handed me a sealed envelope and gave a curt nod. Photos and voice transcriptions are sorted. The USB has everything Rachel requested. I thanked him, and he turned to go without a word. That's what I appreciated most about Noah. He didn't need to ask how I was. He knew. And he understood that strength didn't always come with a smile. Later that afternoon, I met Rachel at her office. We sat across from each other, two women who had once shared dorm rooms and late-night pizza, now joined by something fiercer, justice. She clicked through folders on her screen, her tone steady. "He'll try to control the narrative," she warned. "Expect pushback. Denial. He's going to frame you as vindictive." I nodded. "He already tried. Last night. Said I humiliated him." Rachel gave a dry laugh. "Typical. Men like him never see exposure as consequences, they see it as attack. He said I ruined him, I added. Rachel looked up. No, Isabel. You revealed him. He did the rest on his own. I signed the documents with a strange sense of satisfaction. Not joy. Not vengeance. Just closure clicking into place, one signature at a time. The real fallout started that evening. First, it was his boss, a clipped email from the firm's HR department requesting Jonathan to meet the following morning regarding conduct violations and public behavior concerns. Noah had made sure a few select colleagues received undeniable evidence. Not to sabotage him, but to protect any other woman he might charm with his manipulation. Then came the messages from friends. Our mutual ones. The ones who had once invited us to dinners, laughed at Jonathan's clever jokes, praised us as the perfect couple. Isabel, I'm so sorry. I had no idea. We saw the screenshots. The voice recordings, he actually said that about you? You didn't deserve this. If you need anything, I'm here. There was no satisfaction in it. Just quiet validation. I hadn't imagined it. I hadn't overreacted. And now, finally, they saw the man behind the charm. The man who weaponized affection, who lied with a straight face and smiled as he dismantled our life behind my back. I almost didn't answer when Jonathan called. But something in me needed to hear his voice now, in the aftermath, when the mask had fully slipped and there was nothing left to protect him. I picked up. You've made your point, he said, skipping any greeting. No, I replied calmly, I've made the truth known. Everyone's turning on me, he snapped. My boss called. You sent those files to my friends? What is wrong with you? I didn't ruin your life, Jonathan. You did that when you chose deceit over decency. This isn't how adults handle things, Isabel. You don't drag someone's name through the mud because they fall out of love. I almost laughed. You didn't fall out of love. You fell into someone else's bed for 2 years and built a fantasy life on lies. You weren't just unfaithful, you were deliberate. Strategic. You made me feel crazy for asking questions. You called me paranoid when I was simply trying to make sense of the distance. And now that the curtain's been pulled back, you expect me to be quiet? His voice dropped to a dangerous calm. Do you really want our kids to grow up seeing their parents go to war? That hit a nerve. But I didn't flinch. I want them to grow up watching their mother stand up for herself. I want them to know that love doesn't mean tolerating betrayal. That being a good parent doesn't mean covering for someone else's lies. There was silence on the line. For once, Jonathan had nothing to say. I ended the call. And in that silence, I felt the weight of his narrative collapse. He couldn't charm his way out of this. He couldn't twist the truth or shape a story where he came out clean. Not this time. He was alone with the consequences, and I was no longer afraid of being the one who lit the match. Because I didn't start the fire. I just stopped pretending it wasn't burning. I thought the worst had already passed. That the rooftop confrontation, the unraveling of Jonathan's double life, and the quiet demolition of our marriage would be the storm. But I hadn't understood that exposing the truth publicly wouldn't just impact Jonathan, it would ripple outward, sweeping through the foundation of everything we once shared. The house we lived in together felt different now. Not haunted, not broken, just hollow, like it was holding its breath for whatever came next. It started with the whispers. I had barely opened the curtains that morning when the first message arrived. Then the next. And the next. Friends. Acquaintances. People we once had over for wine and cheese on Friday nights. Some of them were shocked. Some of them apologetic. A few were silent, which told me everything. But the real eruption came when the screenshots, those neatly documented truths, hit social media. I hadn't posted them. That wasn't my style. But I wasn't naive either. Once the file reached a few key inboxes, it was only a matter of time. One photo in particular made the rounds, Jonathan laughing with Delilah outside a hotel, arms tangled like teenagers. It wasn't scandalous by tabloid standards, but it was intimate. Familiar. Taken the same weekend he told me he was at a conference in Seattle. The caption someone added made my stomach twist. Married. For 12 years. While he smiled like this with someone else. By noon, his name was trending, at least locally. Screenshots of his text messages to Delilah, promising her that our marriage was basically over, while planning family vacations with me were circulating through Instagram stories and private group chats. Our town wasn't large. People noticed. People talked. And Jonathan? He spiraled. I received an email from his firm's HR department confirming his suspension pending an internal ethics review. It was standard procedure, they said, given the publicity and the potential breach of company image policies. But I knew it was more than that. His professional life thrived on trust and prestige. His clients wouldn't appreciate knowing he was the kind of man who could lie so convincingly for so long. Rachel called shortly after. "We're gaining ground faster than expected," she said, her voice crisp with momentum. "I don't mean to sound cold, Isabel, but right now, he's panicking. And that gives us leverage." I wasn't celebrating. I wasn't gloating. But yes, I felt powerful. And it was a strange thing, to feel both devastated and whole at the same time. Like I was mourning the dream while finally stepping into the truth of who I'd become. By mid-afternoon, Jonathan texted me. Not to apologize. Not to make amends. But to plead. "You're destroying my reputation. Our family. Why are you doing this?" I stared at the screen, the words flickering like a dare. As if he hadn't spent 2 years dismantling our family in silence. As if I had set the fire instead of just pulling back the curtains. I didn't respond. Not immediately. Instead, I printed the message and added it to the growing file for Rachel. Because everything mattered now. Every word. Every attempt at control disguised as concern. Later that evening, I opened the door to my mother, who stood on my porch with a container of chicken pot pie and eyes that scanned me like she was looking for signs of collapse. "I saw the posts," she said as she stepped inside. "I wanted to check on you." I nodded, hugging her briefly before taking the dish to the kitchen. I hadn't told her everything, not at first. I had spared her the details, unsure of how to say, "Your son-in-law betrayed me and built a second life like it was a hobby." But now there was no hiding. "He lied to all of us," I said, keeping my voice steady as I set plates on the counter. "For 2 years. Maybe longer. I don't even know when it started anymore." She reached over and took my hand. "And you ended it. With grace. With fire. I'm proud of you, Isabel." Those words sank deep. I hadn't realized how much I needed them. Because yes, the truth was out. But that didn't erase the ache. The quiet moments where I wondered if I had missed something, if I had stayed too long, if I had loved too much. That night, after my mother left, I sat in the living room alone. No kids, no noise, just me and the hum of the refrigerator in the next room. I stared at the framed family photo on the wall, the one we took 2 summers ago on the beach, all smiles and sunshine and lies. I stood, walked over, and took it down. I didn't smash it. I didn't cry. I just slid it into the drawer and shut it. Because this wasn't the end of our story, it was just the end of his version. And mine was finally beginning. The courtroom was colder than I expected. Not in temperature, but in tone. The polished wood, the muted echo of shoes against marble, the sterile air of formality, it all felt distant, removed, like the building itself refused to acknowledge the emotions swelling just beneath the surface. I sat straight in my chair, my palms resting on the smooth fabric of my skirt, every inch of me composed. I had chosen a deep navy suit, strong, elegant, nothing flashy. I didn't want to appear angry. I wanted to appear unshakable. Jonathan sat across the aisle, flanked by his lawyer, a man with slicked back hair and the kind of smug expression that told me he thought he'd win before he even stepped into the room. Jonathan looked smaller today. Hollow. The months had changed him. The crisp edges of his arrogance had dulled, replaced by a man who no longer had control over the story. And still, he kept trying to reclaim it. The judge, a woman with gray eyes and a calm presence, entered and called our case. My attorney Rachel stood, her voice firm and respectful as she laid out the facts. I watched as she moved like a conductor, presenting evidence with grace and restraint. This wasn't about spectacle. It was about truth. And truth, as it turned out, made a compelling argument. The file she submitted contained everything we had gathered. Photos. Screenshots, timeline spreadsheets, voice recordings, journal entries, financial statements with unexplained hotel charges. It painted a picture of deceit that wasn't just personal, it was methodical, strategic. Every detail mattered. Every inconsistency in Jonathan's narrative was now a documented crack in his credibility. His lawyer tried to pivot. "She's angry," he said. "She's trying to punish him. She made this public. Damaged his career. This isn't about fairness, it's about retaliation." Rachel didn't flinch. "What my client has done is tell the truth. And sometimes, the truth has consequences." I watched Jonathan's lawyer fumble. He presented a weak defense, suggesting I had fabricated the timeline, that I'd twisted the facts. But when Rachel brought up Delilah, when she submitted the signed affidavit Delilah had willingly provided, detailing her 2-year relationship with Jonathan and the lies he'd told her, it was over. No spinning. No denial. Just silence. Then came the custody discussion. That was where my breath caught. I'd prepared myself for everything, but this was the part that mattered most. Not the house, not the finances. The kids. Jonathan had insisted he deserved shared custody, that he was a committed father, and that our problems didn't extend to his parenting. But the judge didn't look convinced. She asked him questions, reasonable ones, about his whereabouts on specific weekends, why he missed Ava's recital, or why he hadn't returned Ethan's science project in time when it was his week. His answers faltered, hesitated, stumbled. Then Rachel presented the text logs. Messages where Jonathan forgot which child had what event. Where he prioritized his work trips over his scheduled days. Where he told Delilah he was so over the dad routine and wished he could just start fresh. I watched the judge's face as she read those lines. And I knew, then and there, that I wasn't the only one who saw the truth. The ruling was swift. Primary custody, awarded to me. Jonathan would have visitation rights, supervised at first, with reevaluation pending his participation in co-parenting counseling. The property would be divided fairly, but the house? That stayed with me and the children. Alimony and child support would be enforced per state guidelines. It wasn't revenge, it was justice. Jonathan didn't look at me as the judge finalized the order. He kept his eyes down, fingers tapping the armrest of his chair like he could drum away the verdict. But when the judge said, "This court finds in favor of Mrs. Hartman," I exhaled for the first time in what felt like months. Afterward, outside the courthouse, reporters lingered, murmurs buzzing through the spring air. A few cameras flashed in the distance. Rachel guided me down the steps without pause. "Do you want to make a statement?" she asked quietly. "No," I said, shaking my head. "The statement's already been made." We stood in the parking lot for a moment, the sound of traffic drifting by. I glanced back at the courthouse doors, half expecting Jonathan to follow, to say something, anything. But he didn't. He stayed inside. Or maybe he knew there was nothing left to say. That night, I sat on the porch of the home I fought to keep. The kids were asleep inside, their laughter still lingering from our post-court celebration. Just the three of us. Pizza. A movie. No tension. No secrets. Just love. I stared up at the sky, tracing the constellations like old friends. For so long, I had felt like I was spinning through darkness, unmoored, abandoned. But now? Now I was grounded. Not just by a court ruling, but by my own resilience. I hadn't just survived. I had won. Not because he lost, but because I had finally, fully reclaimed myself. The first night in the new house, I lay in bed listening to the unfamiliar creaks of settling wood and the soft hum of the ceiling fan overhead. The kids were already asleep, their laughter earlier that evening still echoing faintly in my memory. We'd celebrated the move with takeout on the living room floor, our boxes half unpacked, Ava wrapped in a fluffy blanket like a burrito while Ethan turned the empty boxes into forts. It wasn't glamorous, but it was ours. A new beginning. One I had chosen. One I had earned. There were no echoes of Jonathan here. No furniture we picked out together. No hidden resentment in the walls. Just light gray paint, floors that smelled of fresh polish, and windows that welcomed sunlight like it belonged. And even though I was exhausted, even though my muscles ached from the chaos of the move, I felt peace. Not just the absence of pain, but the slow bloom of something good. Something quietly hopeful. I met Caleb the following morning. I was dragging a bag of recycling to the curb, dressed in mismatched sweats, my hair pulled into a half-hearted bun, when I heard the sound of a screen door creak open. I turned and there he was, tall, with soft brown eyes and a quiet, easy demeanor. He was carrying a toolbox and had smudges of paint on his forearms. "You must be the new neighbor," he said with a small smile. "I'm Caleb. I live just there." He nodded toward the house next door, a craftsman-style home with a vibrant garden that looked like it belonged in a magazine. "I'm Isabel," I replied, straightening up. "Nice to meet you." He gestured to the recycling bag I'd dropped. "Need a hand?" I almost said no out of habit, but something in his voice was so genuine, so unassuming, that I found myself nodding. "Sure, thanks." That was the beginning. At first, our conversations were small, waving from driveways, exchanging smiles while bringing in groceries. But then came the day I tried to hang a piece of art in the entryway and nearly put a hole through the drywall. Caleb heard the commotion through the open door and offered to help. He was patient, never condescending, even when I admitted I didn't know what an anchor bolt was. "You've got good taste," he said, examining the piece, a swirling watercolor I had painted months ago, during a sleepless night. "Did you make this?" I nodded. "It's a hobby." Or it was. "You should sell them," he said without hesitation. Seriously. No one had said that to me before. Not Jonathan. Not anyone. My art had always been a quiet thing, something I did at 2 a.m. when the world was still. I never imagined someone might look at it and see potential. Later that night, after the kids went to bed, I opened my laptop and searched for online shop platforms. Just to see. Just to imagine. And by the next week, I had uploaded my first 5 pieces. Caleb checked in often, offering to help with shelves or light fixtures I couldn't quite tackle myself. But he never hovered. He never imposed. It was like he had an internal compass tuned to the quiet spaces and people, and he knew just when to show up. And when to let you figure it out alone. One weekend, he stopped by with a small potted succulent. "For your studio," he said. "Every creative space needs a little green." I smiled, genuinely, the kind of smile I hadn't felt in years. "Thank you." He shrugged. "I've seen the kind of light that comes from your windows. Your art deserves that." The kids liked him too. Ethan, especially. Caleb helped him with his science project, a model of the solar system, and Ava started bringing him drawings to add to his fridge. He never said no. There was no grand moment where everything shifted. No cinematic kiss in the rain. Just steady, consistent presence. And in that steadiness, I found something I hadn't realized I needed: safety. One evening, a month after the move, I found myself sitting beside him on the porch steps as the sky turned amber. We didn't say much. Just watched the clouds drift and the kids chase fireflies across the yard. He handed me a mug of tea and said, "You're doing a good job." Those 5 words nearly undid me. Because he meant them. Not out of pity. Not because he thought I needed fixing. But because he saw me. Really saw me. That night, I reopened my sketchbook for the first time in over a year. Not out of obligation or sadness, but because I wanted to. I painted until midnight, the brush dancing across the page, color bleeding into color like a symphony. And when I uploaded it the next morning, someone bought it within hours. My online shop began to grow. Slowly, but steadily. Orders trickled in. Messages from strangers who said my work made them feel something. Each sale was a thread in the tapestry of a life I was stitching back together, one I had built with my own hands, on my own terms. Caleb never asked for more. He never needed to. Because sometimes, love doesn't arrive with fireworks. Sometimes it arrives quietly, with a paint-smudged hand, a borrowed toolbox, and a potted succulent that still sits by my window, reaching toward the light. Years later, the house still held that same golden light in the mornings. The kind that poured through the windows and touched everything gently: blankets tossed on the couch, the easel in the corner, the breakfast crumbs Ava always seemed to leave behind. It was quiet now, the kids at school, the dog asleep at my feet, and Caleb outside tending to the garden, humming the same off-key tune he always did when he thought no one was listening. I sat at the kitchen table with a cup of chamomile, hands wrapped around the warm ceramic, the steady hum of peace woven into every breath. I had just returned from the post office, shipping another batch of paintings. The online store had grown beyond what I'd imagined. My work now hung in homes across the country, and sometimes people sent photos, my art above mantels, in nurseries, in sunlit reading corners. They'd write things like, "This piece helped me through a hard time," or "This reminds me that healing is possible." And every time I felt it. The quiet echo of everything I had survived. The envelope sat beside me on the table, unassuming, cream-colored, and stamped with Jonathan's return address in the corner. I knew what it was before I opened it. I hadn't heard from him in nearly 3 years. He moved out of state shortly after the final custody ruling, and our communication had dwindled to logistics, school calendars, health updates, holidays. He stayed on the periphery of the kids' lives, visiting when the court allowed, sending gifts that rarely landed quite right. I'd made peace with that. I no longer expected more from him, and that in itself was a kind of freedom. I opened the envelope with steady hands. Inside was a single page. His handwriting hadn't changed, slanted, controlled, always a little too careful. Isabel, there's no version of this that erases what I did. No apology that feels big enough. But I want you to know I see it now. The damage. The lies. The way I tried to control the story so I wouldn't look like the villain, even as I became one. I told myself for years that I was the one trapped. But the truth is, I was just too afraid to face my own failure. You gave me more love than I ever earned, and I spent years convincing myself that wasn't enough. I was wrong. I've had time to reflect. And what I see now is a woman who rose from the wreckage I created. You built a new life, not by tearing me down, but by stepping into something bigger than both of us. You didn't break. You rose. And now you thrive. I hope someday the kids understand what real strength looks like, because they saw it in you. I'm sorry, Jonathan. I read it twice. Not because I was unsure of what it said, but because part of me couldn't believe he had written it. The man who once tried to rewrite reality had finally admitted the truth. There was no defense. No manipulation. Just honesty. Late, yes. But real. I didn't cry. I didn't feel the rush of vindication or the sting of old wounds reopening. I felt still, like a chapter had quietly closed on its own. I tucked the letter back into the envelope and placed it in the drawer where I kept other pieces of my past, old photos, a few journals, Ava's first crayon drawing labeled Mommy's Sad Face. That drawer wasn't about pain anymore. It was about remembering who I'd been and honoring how far I'd come. I stood and walked outside. Caleb was crouched by the rose bushes, dirt on his hands, sunlight in his hair. He looked up when he heard the door. "Letter came?" he asked gently. I nodded. It was what it needed to be. He didn't press. He never did. He just stood, wiped his hands on a towel, and opened his arms. I walked into them without hesitation, fitting into that space that had become my home long before I called it that. He kissed my forehead, his touch grounding. "Thank you," I murmured against his chest. "For what?" he asked. "For being everything he wasn't," I said. "For letting me grow without trying to fix me." We stood there a while, listening to the wind move through the trees. Inside, the clock chimed softly, marking the hour. A reminder that time passes, whether we're ready or not. But healing, I'd learned, wasn't about racing time. It was about claiming every moment that came after the fall and choosing to live it fully. That night, I sat down at my desk and wrote a letter. Not to Jonathan. Not for the courts or for the kids. But to the version of myself who once sat in that rooftop restaurant, waiting for love to return. Dear Isabel, you thought that dinner would heal you. You wore the dress, chose the wine, held on to hope like it was the last flicker in the dark. And when it all shattered, you stood anyway. You didn't scream. You didn't beg. You simply rose. You didn't know it yet, But that was the moment everything changed. That quiet strength? That was you reclaiming your story. And look where you are now, loved, whole, thriving. Not because of what was lost, but because of everything you chose to become. You did it. You made it through. Love. Me. I sealed the letter and placed it in the same drawer. A final word to the woman who survived the fire and walked through it barefoot, only to bloom on the other side.